Hello, class. Dr. Davis reporting from home today. Thankfully, I get to stay home today. Uh, wow. So there's so much to go over this week, especially since we're veering into this territory that many Black studies or higher educational classes don't really venture into, like this topic of whiteness. And I feel like in order to understand racism and the history of racism and race in this country, you have to understand where these boundaries are being drawn. And one of the reasons I assigned Nell Irvin Painter's The History of White People was because she attempts to capture this very fully. And as you've noted from the syllabus for this text, The History of White People, and various texts that we'll be going over this semester. We won't be reading the books in full, but should you have time and should you have the means and resources, I encourage you to read the books in full because they are phenomenal texts. We just don't have time to cover everything, and for everything that you should be learning in a class like race and racism, you won't get that from one or two books. Let alone a few anthologies. So that was my reasoning behind that. But again, if you have the time or there are different topics you want to learn about, consult the indexes. Read the table of contents beyond what you're assigned to read, because I've articulated or crafted this class very specific to some of the educational goals that I've noted on the syllabus. So that being said, there's so much that we need to tackle this week, much of which is answered by Nell Irvin Painter herself, and the Race, the Power of an Illusion video assigned for this week, which is episode 2. You should have watched episode 1 already. But just to be clear and cogent about some of the points that I want you to consider this week, include the 3 questions from the PowerPoint, which are: first, what inspires early race scientists to begin to determine the parameters and categorizations of race? And how is this centered on or determined by one's proximity to whiteness? These things are addressed in Race, the Power of an Illusion, quite frankly, quite cleanly, and Painter does a beautiful job in filling out some of the blank spots that a documentary of course, leaves open for viewers to fill. The second question: what determined who was included in this category, quote unquote, white, early on? And in the soon to be United States, perhaps, how does this impact policy and social case amongst not only Black and Indigenous Americans, in which I include Chicano or Mexican people, but also white European immigrants? And I think that in chapter 9, Painter speaks to this quite well as she does a microscopic look at the plight and experiences of Irish American immigrants, because they weren't considered fully white at this time, or at least white by American standards. They're like evaluating the case systems in England or in the United Kingdom related to the Irish, and furthermore, the religious practices of the Irish. This, amongst many other groups in the United States, as we'll learn, were considered kind of a lowercase European group. And that was for reasons of social class, of religious beliefs, of cultural practices. And these fights continue to go on in some points in the UK and in various parts of Europe. And so, it's important to understand some of those ethnic and religious tensions as well, in addition to understanding this larger orchestration of the creation of whiteness, and how it relates to the creation of other races, and then furthermore what becomes racism on a grander scale. And finally, what exactly is, quote unquote, the white man's burden? And with regard to the making of racial case systems, especially in the United States. Whereas, the white man's burden is taken from a poem by Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the well-known novel, The Jungle Book, which is much different from the movie interpretations. The white man's burden relates to the entitled, um, faith empowered vision of white imperialist nations to conquer and civilize communities of color across the world. Kipling is writing his poem in relation to the quest of white imperialists to not only conquer the Philippine people during the Philippine American War between 1899 and 1902, but to, quote unquote, again, civilize and enrich the people's lives with their faith, their ways of living, their cultures, etc. Completely disregarding the fact that within their own means, these groups did build societies and civilizations for themselves, were self-determining prior to, before American appearance in the Philippines, the conquest of the Spanish, who are there before the Americans. And roped into this whole conversation too is not only the people of the Philippines, but also the people of Guam, the people of Puerto Rico, the people of Cuba, those indigenous people, and even some of those who were transported to these spaces and islands by the transatlantic slave trade. So like this is a very complex and rich history, and I feel like in order to understand the sociological ramifications of race and racism, especially in the United States of America, these respective histories and these respective counterpoints and points are important. And it's one thing to simply look at how race and racism have impacted people of color in the United States, but it opens an entirely different vision to look at some of the causes and the whys of racism in America. So for those of you concerned, like, why is there so much history? This is why. And some of the discussions and essays and videos are meant to supplement the sociological end. For instance, if there are points that you want to be addressed with regard to more quantitative issues, like how many people this, or, you know, what is determining issues such as redlining or imprisonment, those will come into question, especially when we get to Kendi and Takaki. However, it's very important that you get how these things come into being. What writings and philosophies and politics inspire this building of the science of race, this idealization of whiteness as the center of beauty in the Western world, this manipulation of ideas and images to really validate that races are different species early on, as opposed to different environmental and geographical variations of humanity, and how race itself, when taken apart bit by bit, is but an illusion, according to our films. However, I made this video to wish you a happy Monday. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, especially the mothers in our class and those of you celebrating your mothers this weekend. And furthermore, happy reading. The discussion questions will be posted a bit later as I synthesize week 1 and week 2's content for you. But I want to keep this video short because my internet at home sucks. And also I wanted to be able to upload that in a timely way for you. So wishing you the best. Next weekend I might shoot the video in my cap and gown because my sophomore are matriculating from our program. So I'll be dressed up for them. But in any case, wishing you the best this week reading. Send me messages, send me emails if you have any questions. I'll be in the grade books in last week's forum, catching up with myself. Again, I just ended a semester at another school, starting this class in the middle of that. So thank you for your patience as well. And have a happy reading week. Bye. See you in the forums.